All right, first and foremost, I'm give all praises to the Most High in the true Hebrew names and in the Hebrew tongue. Kal Halayim, La Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushua, Bahashem, Rukwah, Kwadash, Amamath, and double honors to the apostles and elders, and shalom to you brothers and sisters, pushing and believing its truth and faith and its sincerity into the end. All right, so the title of this lesson is Never Trust Thine Enemy. All right. Never trust thine enemy, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. Never trust your enemy, man. So we're going to jump into who our enemies are. This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. All right, so the Most High warned the children of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, if we did not keep his laws, statutes, and commandments, that certain curses would befall our people. Let's get some of those curses pertaining to our enemies. And this is Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies, for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. All right. So the Lord said he shall bring us into Egypt, our bondage, again with ships. And just to show you that word Egypt in this scripture here represents bondage, I'm going to bring it out in Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, man. All right, so once we were freed from out of Egypt, man, we was not enslaved in Egypt again. So this word Egypt represents bondage. All right, so I'm gonna read that scripture again. And the Lord shall bring thee into bondage again, Egypt again, with ships, by the way whereof I spake unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there ye shall be sold unto your enemies, for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you, man. All right, so how were so-called blacks brought to this land, to this country? By way of ship, right? All right, through the transatlantic slave trade. Now, what happened once we were brought over here into this land? We were sold unto our enemies, man. We were lined up on auction blocks, inspected like cattle, man. They checked our teeth, checked our strength, our body mass, how strong we look, how weak we look, how healthy we look. Observed us like cattle, man. Inspected us like cattle. And then we were auctioned off to the highest bidder, man. All right, we were sold unto our enemies, for bondmen and bondwomen, for slave men and slave women. So right there, you should know who your enemies are, man. And another one, this is Deuteronomy 28, verse 48. Therefore shalt thou serve thy enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck, until he have destroyed thee, man. So during the days of slavery, they literally put yokes of iron upon our people's neck. All right, you can find pictures and documents of so-called Native Americans and so-called black folks with yokes of iron upon their necks, man, being led into slavery. And this is something you could research and look up to see who your enemies are. It's not something that they try to hide. Somebody get the book of Sirach, chapter 12, verse 10. Never trust thine enemy, for like as iron rusteth, so is his wickedness. All right? Iron is guaranteed to rust. Your enemy's wickedness is guaranteed to show, man. That's why the scripture tell you to never trust them. All right? Your enemies would enslave you. Your enemies would beat and whip the flesh off your back. Your enemies would rape your men, women, and children. All right, your enemies would separate households, man, auctioning off the men somewhere, auctioning off the woman somewhere, and auctioning off the kids somewhere else. All right, your enemies, man, would hang you and lynch you from trees. Your enemies would have you killed by dogs, man, attacked by dogs. Your enemies would beat you with billy clubs, man, and spray you with high pressure water hoses. Your enemies would burn down your houses. You know, bomb towns and cities. Your enemies would shoot you while your hands are up. Your enemies would kill you while you are not resisting arrest. These are all things your enemies would do, man. Your enemies would knee on your neck while you telling them you can't breathe. All right? Your enemies would shoot and kill you for playing your music too loud. These are all things your enemies would do. And my point is, would never trust your enemy. Man, these protests going on and our people, you know what I'm saying, protesting the system and their enemies, but also putting trust in them that their government or their police force is going to stop afflicting them and oppressing them. When it's set up to be that way, man. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with protesting, but y'all are protesting things that have been protested for decades and decades and decades and decades. And your enemies continue to show you that they're not going to change, man. So y'all putting trust in your enemies and men rather than the Most High, Yahweh Bahashim Yahushua, the God of Israel, man, our power. Because he is the only one that's going to be able to free us from these conditions, you know, this oppression, this affliction. And you know, the one that's going to be able to put us above our enemies, man, so we can have our foot on their necks. But they don't want to hear that, man. They rather go out and protest. You know, and like I said, nothing wrong with protesting, but protesting while ignoring this word, ignoring this truth. Man, never trust thine enemy. Shalom.